Shock! Russians have pushed migrants to the limit. A second front has opened up inside the country. Uzbekistan has broken loose and openly turned against Russia. The newcomers have started to fight back. The State Duma is tightening the screws. In response, street stabbings, teenage murders, terrorist attacks in Ufa, and clashes in St. Petersburg. While Moscow is teaching migrants the Russian language, they are teaching Russians to be afraid to leave their homes. More details in our report. Watch until the end. My respects. You are watching a new broadcast of Ukraine Today. And I, Andrei Silyakov, I'm here to deliver and present the most important and hottest news. While Putin is trying to denazify Ukraine, a real war is breaking out right under his nose inside his own country. Russia is rapidly sinking into the depths of ethnic conflict, and it's no surprise. The State Duma is churning out increasingly repressive laws against migrants. Fines for evading medical examinations have been increased 12-fold at once. Want to buy a SIM card? Hand over your fingerprints and a photo or you won't get any service. The police have been given the right to deport people without trial or investigation, and in most regions, foreigners are outright forbidden from bringing their families. Russia is building a digital concentration camp, oppressing and restricting newcomers, but the response was not long in coming.
These measures will have a significant impact on the prevention and deterrence of crimes, increasing the level of safeguards against abuse during health checks of foreign nationals and the issuance of medical documents. We are increasing the responsiveness of law enforcement by enabling the exchange of information, allowing them to react to dangerous situations almost instantly, and ensuring the protection of citizens' lives and health.
For every action, there is a counteraction. Migrants respond to aggression with aggression and establish their own rules right on the streets of Russian cities. The news reports resemble a thriller. In the Moscow region, 2 newcomers, reportedly from Tajikistan, stabbed a 17-year-old Russian boy to death. A verbal altercation broke out. The foreigners lost their patience, and after exchanging words, they resorted to using a knife. The teenager died on the spot. There are plenty of such cases. In St. Petersburg, a local resident was strangled in a shopping mall, and in Ufa, the FSB barely managed to bust a cell that was preparing an attack on a police station with automatic weapons.
Militants from Central Asia conducted reconnaissance of the area, bought automatic weapons and components for an IED, and began assembling it. During the assault, the cell leader opened fire on the FSB Special Forces. He was neutralized by return fire. The second member was detained. In the apartment where the terrorists lived, parts of an explosive device and items with terrorist symbols were seized.
But this is not just crime, it's open confrontation. Uzbekistan is already summoning the Russian ambassador, demanding that their citizens not be mistreated. The Republic's foreign ministry has stated outright, labor migrants are facing total lawlessness, endless unauthorized raids, and blatantly degrading treatment from Russians. Allies are literally forced to demand that even the police be taught basic respect for people. Tashkent has made it clear, such rudeness, insolence and violence have nothing to do with normal relations.
The Uzbek side especially emphasized the fundamental importance of preventing any forms of infringement on the rights and human dignity of citizens of the Republic of Uzbekistan, including both law-abiding individuals and those who have violated migration laws during migration inspections and raids.
In Moscow, foreign taxi drivers have also run out of patience. They openly take out their cameras and film the locals, who allow themselves too much. How else are you supposed to act if you can be insulted for no reason at any moment? For example, a Russian gentleman in the Moscow region yelled at an Uzbek taxi driver and called him a slave. This video went viral on social media and was the last straw. Tashkent is demanding that this chauvinist be found and punished immediately.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs regularly monitors publications in the media and on social networks and works with the relevant authorities in foreign countries to take action on identified incidents. In particular, an investigation is also underway regarding the situation that has caused a wide public outcry.
The situation is extremely tense. On one side, there is the government, which wants to squeeze everything it can out of the migrants. On the other, a huge mass of people who have no intention of integrating and are literally ready to take up knives. And this internal explosion could turn out to be far more terrifying for Russia than any sanctions. As the saying goes, an empire rots from within. The level of xenophobia in Russia has broken through the ceiling. A real war is raging inside the country. The titular nation has declared open season on migrants and ethnic minorities. Hatred is flooding the streets of Russian cities. The situation is at a boiling point. Shocking cases of primitive racism. More on this in our report.
Russian citizens standing in opposition to Kobo, migrants and national minorities.
Who is imposing barbaric traditions on the Russian people?
According to the FSB Border Service, in the first half of 25, almost 5.5 million people from Central Asian countries entered the country. That's only 2% less than during the same period in 24.
The situation with migrants in Russia is complicated right now because, on the one hand, the language of hate that constantly comes from TV screens leads to, well, a negative attitude toward migrants in Russia growing stronger every day. And on top of that, you can add various, including criminal stories that happen. Just recently, a native of Tajikistan, who, however, has Russian citizenship, stabbed an 18-year-old guy to death in the Moscow region. Naturally, this also increases the palpable sense of tension.
According to Rosstat, only 1 in 4 plans to work in Russia. The rest mostly move to join relatives. In Russia, they have even created a profile of the typical migrant family. It is often a large family with a low official income. The mother does not work. Such a family can receive from the Russian budget between 700,000 and 2.5 million rubles annually.
Looking at the situation from a different perspective, the Russian economy simply would not be able to function or survive without the presence of migrant labor. And so everything remains trapped in this uncertain and deeply complicated state of affairs.
Fuel is added to the fire by the so-called Russian community, an organization that supposedly defends the rights of Russians. On their Telegram channel, not only are recent crimes committed by migrants published, but in general, propaganda work is carried out to discredit non-Russians in Russia.
Migrant workers are currently employed in many different places. Mainly, although, as we already know, specific and rigorous new legislative acts are being adopted. For example, in some major cities, working as a professional taxi driver is now strictly and entirely prohibited for migrants. In others, not yet completely. But in any case, the overall situation remains quite tense and complex for everyone involved.
It doesn't stop with migrants. National minorities also get in the way of Russians.
When we consider the specific cases of Bashkortostan or Tatarstan, as illustrative examples, the ethnic Russian population residing in these republics is significantly more numerous than the indigenous ethnic Bashkir and Tatar populations, respectively. Therefore, even though the region is nominally called Bashkortostan or Tatarstan, there is still a significant ethnic Russian population there.
In the form that Russia exists today, it is no longer a federation, but is gradually becoming a unitary state where national schools are being closed and the rights of national minorities and ethnic groups are being infringed upon.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The Kremlin is already reaping the consequences of its toxicity and imperial arrogance. Asia is fleeing in horror from its insane neighbor. Neighbors are firmly blocking Russian influence, unwilling to sully themselves by dealing with a pariah. This is not a coincidence, but the inevitable outcome of Putin's policies. How did Moscow turn itself into a plague-ridden barrack that even yesterday's partners are now reluctant to deal with? Find out in our report.
A long-standing friendship is falling apart at the seams. As Bloomberg reports, the Kremlin's longtime allies in Central Asia and the Caucasus are building ties with China, the European Union, Turkey, and the Gulf states, seeking to protect themselves from further aggression by Moscow. They are trying to minimize risks and are looking for ways to distance themselves from Russia as much as possible.
Asian countries are reassessing Russia's role in the modern world and their own relationships with Russia.
The profound and sobering lesson that Central Asian countries have collectively learned from the full-scale invasion is that the Russian Federation remains deeply committed to its long-term strategic goals, regardless of the immense human or economic costs involved. This assessment comes from Kate Mallinson, who serves as a partner at Prism Strategic Intelligence Limited located in London.
Another diplomatic failure has been added to Russia's list, the deterioration of relations with Kazakhstan, even though Putin is loudly proclaiming a great friendship at every turn.
For Russia, Kazakhstan is also one of its largest trading partners within the Commonwealth of Independent States and in the Eurasian region as a whole.
Kazakhstan has long been demonstrating a cautious yet confident distancing from Moscow. It refuses to support the war against Ukraine, does not recognize the annexation of Ukrainian territories, conducts exercises with NATO, and is developing transport corridors that bypass Russia, including routes through the Caspian and Turkey. Tokayev openly states Kazakhstan's principled position right to Putin's face.
We maintain a firm policy of non-recognition towards Taiwan, nor Kosovo, nor South Abkhazia, nor South Ossetia, nor Abkhazia, and it appears increasingly evident that this fundamental principle will also be applied to entities that we categorize as quasi-state territorial formations, which from our perspective include the regions of Luhansk and Donetsk.
Against this backdrop, Russia resorted to energy blackmail. Moscow effectively blocked the export of Kazakh oil. On July 22, 2025, Russia unexpectedly imposed restrictions on the export of Kazakh oil through Novorossiysk, the key route for oil exports from Kazakhstan. The official reason was environmental concerns and technical issues, but in reality, it was a political signal. Astana had gone too far in its independent foreign policy. Against this backdrop, energy blackmail looks like a desperate attempt to regain lost influence. However, the effect is likely to be the opposite. Kazakhstan will accelerate its integration with alternative economic blocs, building closer cooperation with China, Turkey, and the West.
Yes, within the framework of the Eurasian Economic Union, we do have disagreements, since we meet not only in open sessions, but there are also closed-door meetings.
My colleague just now brought up the fact that there are some significant disagreements occurring within the team. We always have disagreements. In the closed sessions, we always argue.
But that's not all. Last year, Russia began demanding that owners of cars assembled in Kazakhstan and imported in 2024 to 2025 pay additional recycling fees at higher rates. Kazakhstan is preparing tough retaliatory measures against the Russian automotive industry. The authorities of the republic are proposing to sharply increase the recycling fee on cars imported from Russia and Belarus by as much as 40 times. In this way, Astana has taken steps to weaken economic ties with Moscow. Additionally, this week, the president of Kazakhstan, Tokayev, effectively accused Russia of financial fraud. According to him, last year about $14 billion were transferred from a neighboring country through a Kazakh bank to other countries. Tokayev noted that from the perspective of law, economics, and even politics, this is an outrageous fact. The president of Kazakhstan did not specify which country he was referring to. The Moscow Times writes that in his speech, Tokayev was clearly hinting at the aggressor country, Russia. In addition to Kazakhstan, Russia is losing another ally. Uzbekistan is also distancing itself from the Kremlin. The Kremlin launched a large-scale campaign against migrants, and Tashkent responded harshly. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan has stated that there were human rights violations during raids by Russian security forces in Moscow on June 25th and is demanding an investigation into the deaths of its citizens. Tashkent insists on the protection of the rights of Uzbek citizens working in Russia despite the tightening of Russian migration laws. As expected, Uzbekistan is pursuing a multi-vector foreign policy, distancing itself from Russia's direct influence in the political sphere.
That is, for a long time, the perception of Russia as the successor to the Soviet Union, a major world power, has in one way or another influenced, for example, the Asian countries that were previously within Russia's sphere of influence. And as for those countries that were not within Russia's sphere of influence, they still regarded Russia as a rather significant global player.
Against the backdrop of Russia's rapid withdrawal from the post-Soviet South, other forces are taking its place. First and foremost, Turkey and China. Turkey already de facto dominates Azerbaijan, is strengthening its influence in Armenia, and is actively engaging with Kazakhstan.
Probably among the Asian countries, Turkey was the first to challenge Russia. We remember the incident with the downing of the Russian plane, but overall Turkey has long positioned itself as a global player, essentially equal in stature to Russia. They are quite comparable to Russia, and Turkey does not behave as a junior partner toward Russia. But lately, we have been witnessing how Asian countries are no longer seeing Russia as a serious threat.
China, in turn, is deepening its economic and logistical cooperation with Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries. Beijing is seen as a more predictable and economically beneficial partner than Moscow.
Asian countries are now reorienting themselves toward new centers of power. First and foremost, of course, China, but Turkey is also not wasting any time and is increasing its influence in the Turkic world, which in fact encompasses not only Central Asia, but also a significant part of modern.
After the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent severing of Moscow's economic ties with the West, China became Russia's main partner. In recent years, trade between the two countries had been growing at an impressive pace, but in 2025, this growth suddenly turned into a decline, showing that the no-limits friendship spoken of by Moscow and Beijing does in fact have its boundaries. Deutsche Welle reports that in 2025, the volume of Russian-Chinese trade decreased for the first time in the past 5 years, dropping by as much as 7% to approximately $228 billion. Turkish drones, Chinese investments, Western diplomatic missions, and regional alliances without Russia's participation are replacing the Russian world.
In the case of Asian countries, everything is much more complicated than, for example, with European countries. And diplomacy there is built on somewhat different principles. That is, I think that the leaders of many Asian countries will continue to show formal respect to the Russian leadership for quite some time. But at the same time, it is clear that the perception of Russia itself has changed dramatically, and now no one sees Russia as some kind of ultimate player in Eurasia who will dictate its terms to everyone in the region.
The dictator of Russia has to pay with a loss of influence, allies, and reputation. Vladimir Putin is now clearly losing the very complex and high-stakes geopolitical game that he himself forcefully imposed upon the entire international community.
But it gets worse, much worse. Asia has delivered yet another resounding slap to Putin. The myth of an allied East has crumbled to dust. Kazakhstan is mercilessly imprisoning mercenaries who fought for Russia, while Uzbekistan is harshly silencing Kremlin chauvinists. How is the East putting the aging dictator in his place? Watch right now.
Asian countries are against Russia's war in Ukraine. So-called Putin's allies are tracking down and punishing their citizens who joined the occupying army.
5 years for participating. Kazakhstan is launching hundreds of criminal cases against its citizens who went to fight in Ukraine.
In 2025, after the project I Want to Live published the personal data of Kazakhstani citizens participating in the war against Ukraine, Astana launched a large-scale campaign to prosecute Kazakh mercenaries. According to Kazakhstan's judicial statistics, last year law enforcement initiated a record 700 cases against those who enlisted in Russian military formations. The numbers have increased dozens of times. In previous years, only a few dozen cases were initiated annually.
Over these years, the Russian Federation has suffered significant losses both in the Central Asian region as well as in the Middle East and Africa. A very striking example is, of course, Armenia. This is, by the way, the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which was deoccupied by Azerbaijan. This is Kazakhstan, which is gradually distancing itself from Moscow and diversifying its export and import flows.
In such cases, the courts do not care where the accused served. They hand down identical sentences both to Wagner PMC fighters and to those who signed contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense. At the same time, Kazakh society, realizing the threat posed by the Russian world, mostly supports Ukraine.
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
So you're not adjacent, are you?
No, it's not.
Really?
No.
Well, what about you? Is Kazakhstan a refuge?
Huh?
Kazakhstan is a refuge after all.
What did you say?
I said a refuge.
Why a refuge? Not interested.
Thank you all very much. Kazakhs don't know us, do they?
The countries of Central Asia that were part of the USSR know better than anyone what Russian chauvinism is. Recently, a serious scandal broke out in Uzbekistan. Locals demanded to ban entry into the country for the pro-Putin artist Sergei Bezrukov, all because of his mocking parody of Uzbeks who don't speak Russian.
And I really wanted to visit, of course, the grave of Tatiana Sergeyevna. It was 1 o'clock at night. Everything was closed there. I said, well, I really need to. You understand? He saw me. He doesn't speak Russian, but he watched the interception. White! The only thing he said in Russian was white. White with an accent. White. I said white.
Notably, starting from 2025, Uzbekistan also began prosecuting Uzbeks who participated in crimes against Ukrainians.
An Uzbek who participated in combat on the side of the Russian Federation was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The defendant escaped from the hospital where he was receiving treatment and returned to his homeland.
There, Putin sternly declares that Russia's zone of political influence extends wherever there is a Russian soldier, and so on and so forth. Well, actually, everyone can already see the real strength of the Russian Federation and are working with players who have far more resources and whose positions take these countries' interests into account much more than the Russian Federation does, which still sees them. Remember how it was phrased during the Soviet era as younger brothers, basically those who are supposed to obey.
For the largest representatives of Asia, the Russian Federation is simply a cheap source of raw materials. After the war began, Turkey, India, and China increased their purchases of energy resources from Russia. And no matter how much Moscow tries to twist the narrative by claiming there are allied relations, in reality, there is nothing even close to a solid alliance. Beijing, in addition to cheap oil and gas, is slowly but surely absorbing Russian regions.
The television said, so basically there will be a factory, jobs. There you go, take that as they say, everything for China. All of this was done for China.
Ankara's cooperation with Moscow is based on cheap raw materials that are advantageous for the Turks. On the issue of war, President Erdogan takes a clear stance. The Russian Federation must return all occupied territories to Ukraine, including Crimea.
Our support for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine remains unwavering. The return of Crimea to Ukraine is a requirement of international law.
By betting everything on the war with Ukraine, the Kremlin has lost its former geopolitical influence around the world. Putin's allies are being overthrown in the Middle East, in Syria, captured in helicopter raids in South America, and even in the region of Central Asia, which has historically depended on Moscow. They are turning away from Russia in favor of China, the US, and Europe.
And what do you think about the latest events? Share your opinion in the comments, leave a like, and stay up to date with the most important news. It gets even more interesting next.